For months, Eleanor Price's team thought they could discredit strong women of color without anyone noticing. She was polished, powerful, and unapologetically ruthless. Naomi Wells, they saw her as just another voice to drown out, just another name on a list. But when they chose Naomi, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know Naomi Wells was a congresswoman, a civil rights attorney, a strategist, and most dangerously of all, she was ready. Because what happened next wasn't just a reckoning. It was a mirror turned on the very system that tried to silence her. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one woman. It's about all of us. Sunlight poured through the high studio windows that morning, casting a quiet glow over the polished glass desk. The cameras were set, the mic was hot. Across from Naomi, Eleanor smiled. Confident this would be her stage. But as the countdown ticked, a single navy folder rested on Naomi's lap. Inside it, the truth. And this time, it wasn't going to stay silent. Eleanor Price had walked into television studios 100 times before. She knew the rhythm, the fake smiles, the lukewarm coffee, the way stage lights flattened everyone's faces into one shade of broadcast-ready beige. But this time, something felt off. She entered the panel room at precisely 8:35 a.m., 5 minutes before the segment would go live. Her heels echoed confidently against the polished floor, her campaign manager trailing behind like a shadow with a clipboard and a forced grin. Across the table sat Naomi Wells, already in her seat, silent, posture composed, hands folded over a navy folder she hadn't yet opened. Eleanor scanned the room like a queen surveying her court. 2 hosts, 3 cameras, a nervous floor manager mouthing cues. It was familiar territory, and she expected the same familiar result: control. For the past several weeks, Eleanor had dominated every panel she graced, spinning half-truths into polished talking points, interrupting at will, disarming opponents with charm laced in condescension. For the first 10 minutes, she did just that. She talked over Naomi, redirected the moderator's questions, and dropped thinly veiled jabs wrapped in faux concern. "What we need is emotional stability and leadership," she quipped, eyes never leaving Naomi's face. But Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She just waited, like someone standing in a storm who already knew the wind would pass. And then the moderator turned. "Congresswoman Wells, do you have a response?" Naomi looked up slowly. Her voice was calm, but her words carried weight. "Before I respond to her opinion, I think we should talk about why she's so loud about mine." A beat of silence followed. She reached down, opened the folder, and placed a single sheet of paper on the table. In that moment, the room shifted, not physically, but energetically, like the air had thickened with something unspoken finally being named. Have you ever been in a room where someone spoke the truth so clearly you could feel the silence holding its breath? What had begun as a routine debate was no longer about policy. It was about exposure. And Eleanor Price was no longer holding the mic. She was standing in the center of a truth she hadn't prepared for. The moderator hesitated, eyes flicking to the paper Naomi Wells had just placed on the desk between them. A quiet murmur rippled across the control room behind the glass. On camera, Eleanor Price's expression barely shifted, but her fingers curled around her pen just a little tighter. "This," Naomi said evenly, "is not a personal attack. It's an internal document, circulated by Ms. Price's campaign just 2 weeks ago." Eleanor scoffed, waving a dismissive hand, but Naomi kept speaking. Calm, steady, relentless. "It outlines a strategy," she continued, turning slightly to face the audience. "Not for policy, not for reform, but for silencing women like me. Women who don't fold when cornered. Women who refuse to dilute themselves just to be seen as reasonable." The moderator looked down, scanning the document. His face changed. Naomi didn't look at Eleanor. She didn't need to. The memo she said, suggests provoking minority women on air, painting them as erratic or overly emotional when they defend themselves. It names me, it names two others, it calls us optics risks. She let that phrase hang. Eleanor's voice cracked as she snapped, "This is a lie, this is a setup." Her hands trembled slightly, the mask slipping. She turned to the camera crew, her smile replaced with panic. "You're letting this happen?" But the moderator didn't move. No one did. And Naomi, unmoved, simply said, "It wasn't meant to go public, but someone sent it to me, and I waited because I wanted to be sure it was real." She took a breath, long and slow. "And it is." A pause settled over the room. Not awkward, not tense, revealing. It was the sound of something long hidden now laid bare. Have you ever witnessed a lie unravel not through shouting, but through stillness? This wasn't about one document. It was about the intention behind it. The quiet, calculated cruelty dressed as political strategy. The normalization of disrespect wrapped in campaign logic. And in that moment, Eleanor Price realized she was no longer in control, not of the room, not of the story, and not of the truth that now had a voice. The silence cracked first, not with words, but with movement. Eleanor Price shot to her feet, her chair screeching against the polished studio floor. The mic clipped to her lapel tugged, then snapped free, falling into her lap like a weighted truth she couldn't bear. "You set me up?" she barked, voice splintered between rage and disbelief. Her eyes darted from Naomi to the moderator, then off camera, searching for rescue. None came. "This is character assassination. You want to talk about optics? Here's your optics. A smear job on national TV." No one responded. The control room froze, half a second too late to cut the feed. Viewers at home saw her hands shaking, her voice climbing octaves, her poise dissolving like sugar in hot water. Naomi didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. "This is what the memo described," she said softly, turning to the moderator. "Push us, corner us, watch us react, then call it a meltdown." Her voice wasn't angry. It was steady, like a quiet drumbeat beneath the chaos. And that's what made it impossible to look away. Eleanor pointed a trembling finger. You think this makes you look strong? You're just playing the victim." Naomi leaned forward, her tone calm as breath. "No, I'm just not playing it all." Another beat. The studio light suddenly felt too bright, the air too thin. Have you ever seen someone come undone not because they were attacked, but because someone else refused to break? One of the producers finally cut to commercial. The screen went black, but the damage had already escaped the boundaries of broadcast. Backstage footage leaked minutes later, Eleanor pacing, cursing, muttering under her breath. "She knew I couldn't defend that without looking guilty." And maybe that was the truth of it. Maybe the moment Naomi handed over that paper, it wasn't about proving Eleanor wrong. It was about holding up a mirror. And Eleanor Price couldn't bear what looked back. When the segment ended, the studio did not buzz with the usual wrap-up chatter. It pulsed with an uneasy quiet, the kind that follows something irreversible. Eleanor Price had stormed off the set. Her mic lay discarded beneath her chair like a casualty of her own unraveling. Behind the scenes, producers whispered, emails flew, and the control room replayed the footage again and again, trying to understand how a single sheet of paper had undone a political veteran in under 5 minutes. Naomi Wells sat exactly where she had been the entire time, still, composed, one hand resting on the now closed navy folder. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't pointed fingers or thrown accusations. And yet, she had changed the entire narrative. There is a peculiar strength in restraint, the kind that unnerves people more than shouting ever could. Naomi knew this. She had been practicing it her entire life. "I didn't bring this to create a scene," she said later during a quiet press conference in a church basement in Tulsa. "I brought it because silence has protected this kind of strategy for far too long." She paused. And silence is no longer neutral. Outside the studio walls, the clip had already gone viral. But what gripped people wasn't Eleanor's meltdown. It was Naomi's stillness, her refusal to let fury define her truth. Have you ever witnessed someone defend their dignity not by fighting louder, but by standing firm in who they are? It wasn't theatrical, it was deliberate. And in a culture obsessed with volume, Naomi reminded everyone that truth doesn't have to shout to echo. Some called it a masterclass. Others called it a trap perfectly executed. But Naomi didn't care what they called it. Because for once, people weren't talking over her. They were listening. By the time the sun set that evening, Naomi Wells had become a name that reached far beyond congressional circles or political pundits. The clip, 12 minutes and 42 seconds of truth delivered with surgical calm, was everywhere. Not just on news feeds, but in group chats, church basements, faculty lounges, and kitchen tables. And hers came first. Wells knew. Truth in stillness. Memo-gate. Then came the commentary, some defensive, some enraged, but overwhelmingly reflective. What struck most viewers wasn't just the revelation of the memo, but how Naomi had refused to perform for the moment. She didn't seek to go viral, she sought to be heard. And that, perhaps, is what made the world lean in. In Bakersfield, a retired school teacher reposted the clip with the caption, "I spent 35 years being told to calm down in meetings, where I was the only black woman. Naomi Wells just showed us why they needed us quiet." In Detroit, a group of high school students watched it in civics class. One girl asked her teacher, "Why was the loud one so mad when the calm one told the truth?" Or was the question lingered. Have you ever watched the truth land so gently it shattered the room anyway? Even political insiders took notice. Reporters began digging. Staffers from other campaigns leaked similar memos, some eerily alike in language and intent. A silent network of targeted messaging exposed by one woman who didn't blink. Naomi's press secretary fielded over 300 media requests in a single day, but Naomi declined them all. She wasn't interested in riding a wave. She was more concerned with where it was going. Because the goal was never to win a moment. It was to wake one. And as millions replayed her words, studied her poise, and shared the clip with captions like, "This is how you lead," something began to shift, subtle, quiet, and irreversible. Her name was Danielle Hart, 27, recent graduate from a top communications program, and until 2 weeks ago, a junior media assistant on Eleanor Price's campaign. No one had seen her, no one had heard from her. But when a local journalist from Toledo sent a message, just a long shot, a whisper into the void, Danielle answered on the first ring. Her voice trembled, even through the static. "I didn't send that memo to Naomi Wells out of revenge," she said. "I sent it because I couldn't keep pretending it wasn't real." She described long hours behind closed doors. Strategy meetings where race was never mentioned outright, but always implied. Where optics was shorthand for how to make confident women look like threats. Where push 'em harder didn't mean challenge ideas. It meant provoke emotion, then call it unprofessional. Danielle had watched it unfold for months. She'd saved that memo, reread it, slept with it under her pillow. Then, when the panel lineup confirmed Naomi would face Eleanor live on air, she made a choice. She sent it anonymously. No note, no warning. "I didn't know if she'd use it," she admitted, "but I hoped she wouldn't stay quiet." And Naomi didn't. Have you ever wondered what finally makes someone speak after staying silent for so long? Danielle hadn't planned to go public, but once the story broke and her conscience stopped burning, she came forward, not for attention, for accountability. When Naomi's office heard, they didn't issue a press release. No cameras, no grand gestures, just a private message, "Thank you for having the courage we're all told to suppress." Danielle cried when she read it, not because she was afraid anymore, but because for the first time in months, she felt seen. Her act of quiet defiance became the missing piece of the story, not just the memo, but the person behind the risk. And that's when people began to realize this wasn't just about one woman holding her ground. It was about the others who helped her stand. 3 nights after the panel aired, Naomi Wells sat in her home office beneath a single lamp, wearing a plain sweatshirt and no makeup, her phone propped against a stack of books. No press team, no script, just a live stream Q&A, broadcast quietly to over 80,000 viewers. The chat buzzed with questions, emojis, praise. But one message lingered near the top, pinned by a moderator. Why didn't you go harder? You could have destroyed her. Naomi stared at the question for a long moment. Then, without flinching, she leaned in. Because I didn't need to, she said. That was never the goal. She paused, let the silence fill the frame. The truth doesn't need fire to burn. It just needs space to breathe. There it was again, her stillness. Not weakness, but choice. She had seen the trap, felt the edge of it under her skin. Eleanor's words, her tone, even her smirk. They were bait, and Naomi knew. One raised voice, one flash of anger, and the headlines would shift. Not memo exposed, but Congresswoman loses temper. She chose clarity over retaliation. But how many times can someone choose grace before it begins to cost them something deeper? I get tired, Naomi admitted softly, of having to be calm while being disrespected, of holding the line so the next woman doesn't have to defend her tone before her truth. She looked directly into the camera. But I don't do it for approval. I do it so we can finally change what the world expects from us when we speak. The chat flooded again. Hearts, hands, respect. Naomi didn't smile for the camera. She just exhaled, a long, quiet release. She hadn't come to destroy anyone. She came to dismantle a system, one word, one breath, one truth at a time. 2 weeks after the broadcast, Naomi Wells stood in a modest community center in Tyler, Texas. No podium, no press, just a folding table, a scratchy mic, and a circle of metal chairs filled with elders, students, and neighbors who'd only recently learned her name. The room was warm, not just in temperature, but in presence. An older woman near the front lifted her hand. Her voice was clear, steady. I saw what happened on TV. I just need to know, how did you stay that calm when she tried to tear you apart? Naomi smiled, not with pride, but with understanding. I breathed, she said. I remembered why I was there, and I reminded myself it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who never got a chance to sit at that table and say, enough. A silence settled, respectful and full. Then, a young man near the back stood up. He wore a hoodie, hands stuffed into his pockets. But don't you ever get tired of having to be perfect just to be taken seriously? Naomi looked at him for a long second. All the time, she replied. But I stopped aiming for perfect. Now I aim for consistent. I aim for clear. Because the people coming after us, they don't need a perfect moment. She leaned forward. They need momentum. And that was the shift. It was never about going viral. It was about creating a rupture big enough for new voices to walk through. Voices that weren't forced to filter themselves into digestibility. Voices that didn't have to trade truth for tone. Have you ever realized a single moment wasn't meant to end something but to begin something else entirely? Later that night, Naomi sat in her car scrolling messages. One stood out. A middle school teacher had written, "My 8th grade girls watched your clip." One asked, "Why did the angry one fall apart when the calm one just told the truth?" Naomi read it twice, then 3 times. She smiled, not because she had won, but because someone somewhere had finally seen the difference. Real strength is not always loud. Sometimes It is the quiet choice to remain calm, tell the truth, and trust that dignity speaks louder than noise. There comes a time in life when we realize that raising our voice isn't always the way to be heard. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is stand still in the truth. Naomi Wells didn't win by shouting. She didn't fight fire with fire. She let the facts speak, and she kept her grace when others tried to strip it away. Many of us have known that feeling, being misjudged, dismissed, told we were too much or not enough. And many of us have learned the hard way that the world often demands silence from the very people who carry wisdom in their bones. But Naomi reminded us, calm is not weakness. It is strength with roots. Maybe the lesson here isn't about politics or panels. Maybe it's about holding your ground with dignity, even when the world tries to shake you. About knowing when to speak, not to argue, but to illuminate. And maybe, just maybe, that kind of stillness, measured, steady, unbending, is what the world needs more of now. Not to win arguments, but to heal. It wasn't in the headlines or the hashtags where Naomi Wells' strength was most visible. It was in the quiet after. The moment she stepped off that stage, took a deep breath, and went back to work. Without fanfare, without gloating, just steady, silent courage. The kind passed down from those who've weathered far worse and kept walking anyway. Ace, Corbin thought, in that stillness there was healing, not the kind that erases pain, but the kind that makes space for something new to grow. From exposed truths came hard conversations. From one woman's calm came 1,000 raised voices. And from a single sheet of paper came a ripple that would not be ignored. The road ahead is still long, but moments like this remind us we do not rebuild justice overnight. We do it choice by choice, voice by voice, truth by truth. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.